what if the physical density of your brain is changing right at this exact second? Like, just by processing the acoustic vibrations of the words I am speaking to you right now.
Right, which is a pretty wild thought.
It really is, because we're not just talking about you absorbing a new piece of trivia. We are talking about literally undergoing a structural rewrite of your biological operating system.
Yeah, complete recalibration.
Exactly. I mean, think about a time when you had a conversation or maybe read a specific book that just permanently shattered the way you look at a totally mundane situation, like an argument with a friend or, just a walk in your neighborhood. And suddenly you couldn't unsee the world through that new lens.
The environment didn't change at all.
No, the environment is identical,
Mm-hmm.
but the instrument you used to perceive it did change.
And, that phenomenon is usually just dismissed as, oh, they have a new perspective, or they had a paradigm shift.
Right. Just a nice metaphor.
Exactly. But the source material we are pulling apart today for you argues that it is a literal mechanical recalibration of your neurobiology. We are looking at this highly complex, honestly slightly intimidating architectural text from the year 2026.
Oh, totally intimidating.
Yeah, it's called the Prism of Odysseys, or Prisme des Odyssees. And it makes this foundational claim that it throws our entire understanding of human capacity out the window.
I have been dreading and anticipating this deep dive in equal measure. I really have. Because the stakes the author outlines here are just absolute madness.
They really are.
The premise is basically this. What if the most advanced technology on Earth isn't made of silicon? It's not sitting in some massive server farm, and it is definitely not powered by artificial intelligence. What if the most advanced technology is actually wired directly into human consciousness?
And the kicker is that it has been deliberately rendered invisible to the very people who carry it.
Yes. So today we are putting an exclusive magnifying glass on two specific sections of this text for you. Extension 29, which is titled Constellations of Realities, and Extension 30, titled Consciousness as Technology.
But, before we go anywhere near those massive claims about human technology, we really have to establish the epistemic grid the author uses.
Oh, this is so crucial.
It is, because the text is just ruthless about categorization. The author completely refuses to blend proven neuroscience with, fringe theories.
They draw a really hard line.
A very hard line. They maintain this strict boundary between what is established science, so stuff backed by peer-reviewed consensus, and what is active frontier research with mixed results. And then they separate all of that from what is purely a speculative hypothesis.
Right. They know exactly what they can prove in a lab, and they literally name their speculations as speculations.
Which gives the whole text this sort of chilling credibility, honestly.
It really does. Because when we hit the speculative stuff later in the deep dive, you realize, wait, this is actually built on a foundation of hard neurobiology.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start with Extension 29, which introduces this concept of the ontological act of reading.
Ontological meaning relating to the nature of being.
Right, exactly. And the author drops an axiom right at the beginning here. They say there are two categories of texts in the world. The first category transmits information, and the second category transmits forms.
And, most of what we consume daily falls into that first category, right? A news article, a financial report, a Wikipedia page.
Right, they just increase your database.
Exactly. You acquire data, but your internal processing system, the actual way you filter reality, remains completely untouched by it.
It's like downloading a PDF.
Yes. But the Prism of Odysseys claims to sit in the second category. Form-transmitting texts do not aim to just, add files to your hard drive. They alter the foundational structure of the reader's perception.
Like flashing a completely new operating system onto a hard drive.
That's a great way to put it.
But I have to say, when I first read this, I immediately thought of it like a cymatic plate. You know those metal plates covered in sand that you see in physics demonstrations?
Oh, yeah, where they play the sound frequencies?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you just pour more sand onto the plate, that is informational reading. You just have a bigger pile of sand.
Right.
But reading a form-transmitting text is like running a specific sound frequency through that metal plate. The vibration physically reorganizes every single grain of sand into this complex geometric pattern. The sand is exactly the same, but the structure is entirely new.
That is a phenomenal analogy, because the text explicitly states that it wasn't built to just be understood in the traditional intellectual sense.
Which is wild for a book to claim.
Right. Comprehension is framed almost as a byproduct. The primary function of navigating these concepts, mapping out what they call source resonance, resonant geometry, and the physiological conditions of portability, the point is to force a structural reconfiguration in the reader.
A reconfiguration of what they call the biogesial, right? The biosoftware.
Yes, the biogesial. It's the text's term for this highly programmable system that sits right between your raw hardware, so your nervous system, your brain, and the external world.
Okay.
It dictates how incoming data is filtered, how it's prioritized, and how it's actually felt by you. And to interact with the world, your biogesial relies on an instrument the author names the sonde integral, or in English, the integral probe.
I spent a lot of time in the source notes trying to translate the sonde integral into functional biology because it sounds kind of abstract at first.
It does, yeah.
But it's not just a philosophical concept. It reads like a literal description of our total sensory apparatus. So the reticular activating system and the brainstem, our vagus nerve, our visual cortex, it's all operating together as a unified probe that we cast out into the environment to read reality.
And the author argues that you cannot read a corpus detailing the deep mechanics of human resonance without your sonde integral being forced to, like, stretch, bend, and adapt to the sheer density of those concepts.
It is an ontological act.
Exactly. You don't just learn about the concepts. The actual act of processing them changes your state of being.
But okay, let me push back on this a little bit. Let me challenge the permanence of this idea.
Yeah.
Because the text claims this leads to what they call new constellations of reality.
Right.
It says that after reading or after listening to it, the person enters a new form of existence. And, I mean, that sounds incredibly poetic. But biologically speaking, neural pathways degrade if they aren't used.
That's true, yeah.
So can reading words on a page truly be an ontological act that permanently locks the biogesial into a new configuration? Or is that just a poetic exaggeration by the author? Is it just a temporary high of intellectual stimulation?
That is a completely valid skepticism, but the author actually addresses this by differentiating between a fleeting emotional reaction and a structural adaptation.
Okay, how so?
Well, think of how learning to read a new language physically alters the visual word form area of the brain.
Right.
Once those neural connections are myelinated, once they are insulated and physically locked in, you can never look at those specific foreign characters again and see just meaningless shapes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you can't unread it.
Exactly. Your brain is permanently forced to decode them. And the prism operates on that exact same logic. Once your sonde integral learns to detect the subtle frequencies of interaction and resonance that are detailed in the text, you cannot unperceive them.
That makes so much sense.
You walk into your office and you no longer just see coworkers. You perceive competing and harmonizing biological software programs interacting in real time.
The world remains identical. The traffic on your commute is the exact same. Your apartment is the same. But because your sonde integral is operating on a completely new frequency, the reality of that world is entirely different.
The instruments have changed.
The instruments have changed. And this is where the text introduces a concept that genuinely unnerved me a little bit. The unconscious transmission of this new biogesial into the space field.
Ah, the living library effect.
Right. The claim is that once your biogesial is deployed differently in a physical space, you begin transmitting this new operational form to others without speaking a single word.
It just radiates.
Yeah, the text says the living library writes itself into every conversation you have and every space you occupy. But mechanistically, how is this justified in the source material? Because to me, it skirts dangerously close to the idea that I am walking around inadvertently reprogramming my family and friends.
Well, we have to look at the physics of acoustic resonance to understand the author's logic here, because they view this not as manipulation, but as a natural resonance. It is not an invasion of another person's agency, it's an invitation.
An invitation, okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about tuning forks. If you have 2 grand pianos in a room and you strike a C chord heavily on one, the C strings on the other piano across the room will begin to vibrate sympathetically.
Just from the sound waves.
Right. They share a physical environment and a structural capacity for that exact frequency.
So a recalibrated human presence acts as that struck chord.
Precisely. The human nervous system is an open loop. We do not self-regulate in isolation. If your biogesial is stabilized at a high level of coherence, meaning your autonomic nervous system is regulated, your heart rate variability is high, your cognitive focus is sharp, your physical presence emits a measurable electromagnetic field primarily from the heart.
Wow.
Furthermore, your microexpressions, your respiratory rate, your vocal cadence, they were all being subcortically tracked by the people around you.
Yeah.
Their sonde integral detects your stability.
So their nervous system essentially hears the C chord and then decides whether or not to vibrate along with it.
And often, because biological systems just naturally seek efficiency and harmony, their nervous system will naturally begin to mimic yours to reduce its own physiological load.
That is incredible.
You are transmitting a form of existence simply by embodying it.
Okay, if human presence is basically this active radiating network of biological software updates, then we are dealing with a species that is fundamentally technological in its biology.
Yeah.
And that forces us directly into Extension 30, consciousness as primary technology. The author doesn't mince words here at all. They argue that this incredible radiating, reality-altering capacity has been progressively rendered invisible to us, like obsolete, erased.
The framing they use is incredibly sobering. The text posits that we are walking around with a universal BioGesil, this innate technological framework capable of massive feats of processing, self-regulation, and even non-local interaction, but we have been conditioned to use it as if it were a simple abacus.
It's like having a state-of-the-art smartphone, but being tricked into using it only as a basic calculator.
Exactly.
We use it to calculate our taxes, get angry at traffic, and just doom scroll on external devices. Completely oblivious to the fact that the consciousness we are using to do those mundane tasks is, in itself, the most advanced interface in the universe.
We have completely ignored the apps.
Right. And the purpose of Extension 30 is to name exactly what has been erased and provide the framework to recover it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because anyone can write a manifesto claiming humans are magic, right?
There are thousands of those.
Exactly. But the Prism of Odysseys demands absolute rigor. They know the stakes are high, so the scientific rigor has to be flawless. They break this down into 3 tiers in their epistemic grid.
So let's examine that first tier, the established science. These are the foundational blocks that validate the concept of the BioGesil and the sonde integral using peer-reviewed biology. The author starts with the absolute proof that consciousness produces highly measurable physical effects on the body.
They cite Davidson and Lutz's 2008 work on the neurology of contemplative states. And what I found so compelling in the notes here isn't just the conclusion, but the actual mechanism.
Right, the gamma waves.
Yes. They studied long-term meditators, people who have spent tens of thousands of hours just focusing their consciousness. And they found that these individuals weren't just, relaxed. Their brains were generating high-amplitude gamma synchrony.
And just for context, gamma waves are the fastest brain waves. They are associated with peak concentration, sudden insight, and the binding of different sensory inputs into a single, cohesive perception.
So what Davidson and Lutz proved was that human intention, the deliberate direction of consciousness, can physically alter the electrical output of the brain's hardware.
The software literally commands the hardware to change its electrical state.
And it goes beyond just electrical states into literal physical architecture, which blew my mind. The text leans heavily on Holzel's 2011 research regarding mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, and neuroplasticity.
Which is a huge study.
Massive. We hear neuroplasticity thrown around a lot in pop science. But the mechanical reality of this study is staggering. Holzel took people who had never meditated before, had them engage in this specific application of consciousness for just 8 weeks, and then put them in an MRI.
And the brain scans revealed actual structural changes in gray matter density.
Just from 8 weeks of thinking differently.
It is the ultimate proof of the BioGesil in action.
The amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, the part that screams at you when you are stressed, it physically shrank. It lost density.
Meanwhile, the hippocampus, which governs learning, memory, and emotional regulation, grew denser.
And the temporoparietal junction, which is associated with perspective taking and empathy, it thickened too.
What the author is doing by citing Holzel here is grounding their claim in physical reality. When the text says reading the prism is an ontological act that reconfigures you, it is pointing directly to this established mechanism.
Right.
Where you place your attention physically shapes the density of your neural networks. Your consciousness is the programmer actively rewriting the circuitry.
But the grid doesn't stop at the boundaries of the individual skull. Which brings us back to that living library concept we talked about earlier, the transmission of the BioGesil into the space field.
Yeah, the interpersonal stuff.
Right. The author backs this up with the inter-individual synchronization studies by Feldman in 2007 and Hassan in 2012.
Hassan's work with fMRI is particularly relevant here. He studied neural coupling during communication.
Oh.
When someone is telling a story, their brain lights up in a very specific, complex pattern. Hassan discovered that the person listening to the story begins to mirror that exact fMRI pattern.
Wow.
The listener's brain activity physically couples with the speaker's brain activity, often with just a very short delay.
So the acoustic vibrations of the speaker's voice hit the listener's ear, translated to electrical signals, and literally forced the listener's brain into a shared architectural state.
Exactly. And Feldman demonstrated this physiological syncing with heart rates and autonomic nervous systems between infants and caregivers, and then later between adults.
This is the established science of the sonde integral.
It is. We are physically designed to cast our probes out, detect the biological software of the people around us, and synchronize.
It fundamentally changes how you view a simple conversation. I mean, you aren't just exchanging information, you are engaging in a biological handshake. You're negotiating whose nervous system is going to adapt to the others.
Yeah, it's profound.
And this leads right into how the text reframes intuition, because it strips away all the mystical baggage and defines intuition purely biologically. They reference Ledoux's 1996 work on rapid subcortical processing and Antonio Damasio's 1994 theory of somatic markers.
See, the traditional view of intuition is that it's just this unexplainable, mystical feeling. But the PRISM argues it is simply your sonde integral operating at a speed that completely bypasses your slow, rational cortex.
Right, and the unfiltered probe.
Exactly. Ledoux showed that sensory information like, say, the sight of a threat, it travels to the amygdala and triggers a bodily response milliseconds before it ever reaches the visual cortex for conscious processing.
So your body reacts before your conscious mind even knows what it's looking at.
Yes, and Damasio's somatic markers take it even further. As you move through life, your nervous system tags certain situations, certain people, and environments with a physical sensation, a marker.
Okay, I follow.
When you encounter a similar pattern later, even if your conscious mind hasn't recognized it yet, your biogesial retrieves that marker and gives you a gut feeling. It is rapid, highly complex data processing, not magic.
Okay, so science proves mindfulness changes the brain physically, and we sync up with people we talk to, and intuition is subcortical data processing. But I have to play the skeptic for a moment.
Go for it.
Isn't calling this technology a bit of a stretch? I mean, by definition, isn't this just biology doing its thing? Calling a gut feeling a primary technology feels like, I don't know, trying to rebrand basic physiology to make it sound cool and futuristic.
The author actually anticipates that exact pushback. And the distinction they make lies entirely in intention and application.
Okay.
Think about a piece of flint. In its natural state, just sitting on the ground, it's just a rock. That's biology.
Right.
But when a human being picks up that flint, understands its physical properties, and strikes it against iron to deliberately create a spark to cook food, that rock has now been utilized as technology.
Oh. It's the deliberate application of scientific knowledge for a practical purpose.
Precisely. We naturally experience neuroplasticity and synchronization by accident all the time. But when a human being consciously learns the mechanics of their biogesial, when they intentionally regulate their autonomic nervous system to achieve gamma synchrony, when they deliberately deploy their sonde integral to read the somatic markers of a room, and when they use their stabilized presence to regulate the nervous systems of their peers.
They are wielding your biology as a technology.
Exactly. They're no longer just experiencing biology.
That reframing changes everything. It literally means we are the interface.
We are.
But the author doesn't stay comfortable in the realm of established neuroscience. They move to the bleeding edge of the frontier,
Yes, the second tier of their epistemic grid.
the active research category. And this is where they explore the idea that consciousness might not just regulate our internal biology, but that it might actively interact with physical reality itself.
And this is where we really must maintain the author's strict rigor, because they do not present this tier as absolute, undeniable fact. They present it exactly as it is, an ongoing investigation, an open frontier.
Right. They aren't claiming it as absolute truth, nor are they dismissing it.
Exactly. And the main thing they cite here are the P-ear experiments, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, which was conducted by Robert John and Brenda Dunn over 2 decades, from 1987 to 2007.
The methodology of this is just wild to me. It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi novel. But this was a highly controlled academic program at Princeton University.
It was very rigorous, yes.
They built these machines called random event generators, or RAGs. And mechanistically, these machines rely on quantum noise like radioactive decay or thermal noise to produce a completely random stream of ones and zeros.
Right, so over time it should be a perfect 50-50 split.
Exactly. And the experimental protocol was remarkably simple, but so strange. They asked ordinary operators to just sit near the RAGs and form a mental intention. First, intend for the machine to produce more ones, then intend for it to produce more zeros, and then establish a baseline where they intend nothing at all.
Just using absolutely nothing but their consciousness.
Nothing but their minds. And what did the data actually show? Because I know the text is very, very careful with how it interprets this data.
It is. Over millions of trials spanning decades, the data showed that human intention did correlate with a deviation in the random output. The operators were able to slightly skew the results toward their intention. Now, the deviation was incredibly small. We're talking fractions of a percent above chance. But statistically, over that massive volume of trials, the odds of it happening by accident were billions to one.
But again, the author of the Prism doesn't just hold this up and say, look, we have superpowers, case closed. They actively point out the extreme difficulty of replicating these effects.
Right. Other labs really struggled to get the same results.
Which is why it remains in the active research category.
What's fascinating here is how the author handles this data. It suggests that consciousness may have a non-local interaction with physical matter, a kind of macro-scale observer effect. But it is highly volatile, it's dependent on the psychological state of the operator, and it's not yet fully mapped.
The faculty of manifesting, of intention, physically pressing against reality, it just shows mixed results in controlled studies. They also bring up the Ganzfeld studies in this section by Bem and Onderton from 1994. This is about mapping the idea of interconsciousness communication beyond known sensory channels.
Basically telepathy.
Right. And the mechanism of the Ganzfeld experiment is designed to create a mild sensory deprivation. The receiver lies in a comfortable chair. They wear these translucent half ping-pong balls over their eyes bathed in red light, and they listen to white noise through headphones.
The goal being to completely silence the physical sonde integral.
Because if your eyes and ears are receiving uniform, unvarying signals, your brain just stops paying attention to the external physical environment.
Exactly. You turn down the volume on the ordinary physical senses so that theoretically subtler non-local signals can be perceived.
And meanwhile, in an entirely different isolated room, a sender focuses on a randomly selected target image and tries to transmit it to the receiver.
And, again, the author's rigor is so present here. The text notes that the meta-analysis of these Ganzfeld studies yielded positive results. The receivers identified the correct targets at a rate significantly above chance. But the author also explicitly acknowledges that this methodology is still hotly contested by skeptics.
Right. They are mapping the bleeding edge of human capacity, showing where the biogeschal might extend past the skull without claiming the science is completely settled.
It creates a spectrum of responsibility for the reader. If the established science proves your consciousness, rewrites your brain, and syncs with others, and the active research suggests your intention might literally bend physical reality, the implication is immense.
It really is. I mean, if you were listening to this right now, just consider the implications. If even a fraction of this active research proves reliable, it means our thoughts have a literal physical weight in the universe.
They are not private, harmless events locked in a vacuum.
Exactly. Your attention is a physical force. How would that change how you manage your daily stress or where you focus your attention?
Which naturally forces a massive question.
Oh, yes.
If human beings possess a biological technology capable of structural self-healing, autonomic regulation, intuitive data processing at staggering speeds, and potentially non-local influence over reality, why is the world in a state of chronic anxiety, illness, and fragmentation?
Why do we feel so incredibly powerless all the time?
And this brings us to the final tier of the author's epistemic grid, the most dangerous and provocative idea in the text.
The speculative threat.
Yes, the author explicitly names this as a hypothesis, a conceptual necessity to explain the obsolescence of our primary technology. They introduce the concept of the système mimique, the mimic system.
I have to admit, when I first saw the term mimic system, my mind went straight to a sci-fi dystopia, like some sinister AI or a shadowy cabal actively suppressing human biology.
Right, like a movie villain.
Yeah. But reading through the notes, the mechanism of this system is far more mundane and honestly, therefore, far more terrifying.
It's not necessarily a conscious villain at all.
No. It is the algorithmic, cultural, and societal architecture we live in every single day.
The hypothesis is that there is a deliberately organized system, maybe driven by economics, attention harvesting, and digital algorithms that functions by creating perpetual dissonance.
And its primary goal is to prevent the BioG-seal from coming online. But why? Why would a system want to suppress human cognitive technology? What does the system gain by making our BioG-seal obsolete?
Well, the text theorizes this based on the theme of frequential sovereignty, or souveraineté fréquentielle.
Okay, unpack that for me.
A human being operating with a highly coherent BioG-seal can self-regulate their nervous system. They can process trauma through contemplative neurology. They can connect deeply with their community through biological synchronization.
They are sovereign.
Exactly. They generate their own internal upgrades, which means a fully operational human technology is impossible to monetize.
Oh, so they don't buy anything.
They don't need to. If you don't know you possess the ultimate technology for healing and connection, you feel a profound void. The mimic system creates an environment of extreme noise and chronic stress that disrupts your foundational original frequency. It forces your amygdala into a state of constant hypertrophy.
Always in survival mode.
Always. And once you are entirely dysregulated, disconnected from your primary technology, you are easier to manage, distract, and monetize. The system steps in and sells you external inferior technologies to compensate for the internal tech you forgot how to use.
The pharmaceutical interventions for stress, the digital platforms that simulate human connection without the actual biological synchronization, the endless doom scrolling to numb the hypervigilance.
Exactly. The mimic system sells us the plastic calculator, convinces us it's the pinnacle of innovation, and relies completely on us forgetting that we have a supercomputer wired into our consciousness.
The speculative thread is that modern civilization is not just a neutral environment. It is an active architecture of desynchronization.
It floods your Sunday integral with so much contradictory, fear-based data that the probe just becomes exhausted, retracted, and entirely focused on basic survival.
You can never achieve the gamma synchrony required to rewrite your reality because your bandwidth is totally consumed by the mimic system's noise.
Which brings the entire deep dive full circle. It explains why reading the Prism of Odysseys is framed as an ontological act.
Right. The ultimate goal of navigating this text, of allowing the reading to be a form-transmitting act, is to reclaim this sovereignty.
It's about a total rejection of the mimic system. By understanding the mechanics of your BioGeo, you begin the process of reclaiming frequential sovereignty. You learn to filter out the algorithmic noise.
You learn to consciously deploy your attention to physically reshape your neural architecture.
You become an active, resonating node rather than just a passive consumer of a chaotic reality.
It is a profound shift in identity. The realization that you are the technology. The interface you've been waiting for, the upgrade you thought you needed from the outside, has been dormant inside your own biological architecture this entire time.
The architecture of thought in this text is incredibly dense, obviously, but the application is immediate.
It really is.
The author warns that this technology has been rendered invisible. But consider what you've done for the past hour.
You've been listening to us pull apart the neurology of consciousness. You've held the concepts of the BioG shell, the sonde integral, and frequential sovereignty in your mind.
By the author's own rules of neuroplasticity and the living library, simply by listening to this deep dive, has your consciousness been actively processing a form-transmitting frequency?
Has your sonde integral already begun to recalibrate?
The acoustic vibrations of this conversation have passed through your nervous system.
Are you walking away from this audio with a slightly different BioG shell than the one you woke up with? The science suggests that you are. Thank you so much for joining us in the deep end today. Keep your internal technology sharp, reject the mimic system's noise, and keep your frequency sovereign.